We welcome you to another edition of Being Well Informed. My name is Claudia Barber, and I am your host on this fine afternoon. We are excited about today's edition of Being Well Informed because we have some wonderful, wonderful guests that we are looking forward to sharing with you the topic of Black in the newsroom. Hello, Collette, Watson, and Joseph. Is it Torres?
Torres, you got it, Torres.
Wonderful. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I can kick it off, Joe, if that's all right. As you said, Claudia, I'm Collette Watson. Thank you for having us, first of all.
Yes.
It's really wonderful to be here with you. I'm the Vice President of Cultural Strategy at an organization called Free Press, based in Washington, D.C. We've been advocating for a more just media and society for about 19 years. I think Free Press has been in
Mm.
existence. And I've been there for about 5 years, during which time we launched the Media 2070 project, and through which we are campaigning for media reparations. And so that's how, Joe and I work together, but I'm joining you from sunny Arizona and feel really grateful to be here.
Now, wait a minute. Media reparations. That sounds like a powerful combination there. Media reparations.
hmm Absolutely. I mean, Joe can tell you all about it. But we certainly launched in 2020 with a 100-page essay outlining examples of media harm. And
Mhm.
Joe is, our historian and expert on that subject. So I will kick it to you, Joe, to say a little more about that.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Claudia. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I mean, it's Joseph Torres, and we're Free Press, and I've been there for about 15 years, since 2007. And my work is focused on on issues of race and media justice, basically. And so I'm very proud to be part of the Media 2070 project and work with Collette and the colleagues within the 2070 team. And we launched in 20 it's going to be 2 years ago next month, where we launched this project to reconcile and repair the history of anti-Black racism and the harm of racial terrorism that our media companies and our media system has inflicted on the Black community. And it's a story that has gotten not enough attention. We always think about media and objectivity and fairness and all this other stuff, but when you look at the history of our media system and the media institutions that occupy them, there is a history of racial violence and media companies inflicting harm through their narratives. In some cases, even worse. And then we have media policies that the government created that continue to allow a small group of people to control our media industry, the control of the most powerful kind of media outlets, and when it comes to broadcast and radio, and to continue to uh, uh, weaponize
Mhm.
anti-Black narratives that serve a political purpose of ensuring the racial caste system that this country was built on uh, continues. So
Well, there is a quote, and I don't have the exact quote in front of me from Malcolm X, that the media can make uh, the devil look like an angel and an angel look like the devil. How do you respond to that quote in the context of what you're doing in seeking media justice?
I just add real quick that absolutely. I mean, when you have narratives, as I mentioned, are political tools, and they're used to tell a story, to put to a narrative that further uh, political further political power, right? In order for policies to be adopted. But narratives are power. Narratives is about power in this country. Like the creation of narratives. And when you have the dehumanization of Black folks, the dehumanization of Indigenous communities, um, uh, the Latinx community, the Asian American community, is serving a political purpose of upholding a white racial hierarchy.
Now, you provided for us a clip that I want to share with my audience right now. Before we present the clip, tell us about the clip and what are the key takeaways.
Absolutely. So this is Black in the Newsroom, which is a 15-minute short documentary created by the Media 2070 Media Reparations Project. And our goal with this was multi-pronged. We wanted to first tell the story of one individual journalist, Elizabeth Montgomery, who has been very forthright and very brave and courageous in sharing the difficulties she encountered attempting to be a journalist in one major US newsroom, the Arizona Republic. So we wanted to amplify her story that she was telling to the world. But also we wanted to, through the lens of her story, amplify for people the fact that our media is a system, one that has shaped our lives, and the truths and narratives that we believe that then inform policy, as Joe was just saying, and really shape our lived realities and the ability of marginalized groups to exist and determine our own destinies. We understand that the truths that we hold as far as who deserves care, who deserves social services, who deserves to have a safe, clean place to eat and water access, all of those truths start with our news. And if we don't have Black journalists being able to exist in the news system, then we don't have truthful reporting and we don't have a chance at real democracy. And so we wanted to help people to understand that through the lens of seeing the kind of mistreatment that Elizabeth experienced.
All right, let's go straight to our video and, give the viewers an opportunity to learn more.
Do you trust news media?
No, absolutely not.
Usually social media. I would prefer to go on to different apps, mostly Black apps for us.
Do you trust news?
Nope.
To me, it's all tabloid now at this point.
The stories that they show, it's not stories of us. It's mostly, non-melanated people that I see. So if it could be more of us shown, then I would probably watch it more.
I'm Elizabeth Montgomery, and I'm a journalist. I define journalism as the community. It's a business, yes, it's part of corporations, but it's really the community. We're telling the community stories. I am born and raised in Atlanta. My dad actually was the journalist that I looked up to growing up. He worked at newsrooms all across Atlanta, and I grew up in those newsrooms. I was kicked out of my house at 18, and journalism was the one thing that I knew I could do. And I landed an internship at the Atlanta Voice newspaper, and I worked there while I lived in my car. I got paid $25 a week to transcribe interviews. I got to write a couple interviews too at the Atlanta Voice. That's a Black newspaper. It's the Black press of Atlanta. And working there really taught me that my community has a voice, the Atlanta Voice. And I really wanted to, it kind of instilled in me that the stories that need to be told are the stories that nobody really hears about. And so I learned early on that telling Black stories is what I'm passionate about and what I wanted to do going forward. I didn't go in wanting to be the person to highlight the Black community or highlight communities that are underrepresented. I went in just wanting to get a job in journalism and just be an awesome journalist. But once I saw that this was an issue, I was like, somebody has to write these stories because I'm meeting people, I'm networking out there, and there are amazing people doing amazing things, but they're not in the media, in the news. They say they care about diversity and they want the newsroom to reflect the community, and so they do things so that the newsroom can reflect the community, but they don't put the same support behind that. It's kind of like, yeah, let's agree to this, but we're not going to actually help this happen. We're going to hire a bunch of people and not pay them as they should be getting paid.
The Leavers survey, it was a survey of 101 respondents. The central hypothesis at the start of it was that journalists of color leave the industry at the mid-career point. So there's the narrative before this is that you just have to focus on training the journalists of color, and that's enough. They'll come in once they have access, that's sufficient. And what this survey shows is that that's actually not where the problem is. The problem actually may be the newsroom itself.
When newsrooms are white dominated, and there is not the diversity that reflects the community or that reflects the demographics or the future of this country even, it means that stories aren't told truthfully.
There was a position that was open and I went for it. I asked, hey, can I do this? I think I would be great as arts and culture reporter. This is what I'm passionate about. I love writing. We've seen in the past how my stories do. And it took a while, but eventually they moved me into that position. I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't buy groceries at the same time. It was either rent or groceries. For that to be my life as a journalist who had been reporting for over a decade, who got into journalism in 2006, it was just mind-blowing to me that I don't even make enough to afford food at this point. Like, I'm not homeless, but I still can't eat. It opened my eyes a lot because when that pay study came out and it showed that I make at least $25,000 less than a reporter who has less experience than me.
Going back to the Reagan years in the 1980s, through the Clinton years and the 1996 Telecom Act, which removed a lot of the limits on media ownership and the rules that were in place to ensure that local media was held in local hands.
As soon as we got the Reagan administration, we had an FCC chairman who argued that the television is just another appliance, a toaster with pictures. This led almost directly to media consolidation. We see in 1985, immediately after public interest regulations were rescinded, we had Cap Cities purchasing ABC, Murdoch purchases 20th Century Fox, heavy concentration of ownership in local television by a few large corporations eroded the quality of news that Americans receive. This was predicted by Pew after extensive studies in 2003.
We're back, and that was quite a presentation because initially the clip started with the question, do you trust the media? And I think that there was a resounding nope, but we still read it every day, don't we?
We do, because we want to be informed about the world around us. But the fact is that the information that we're getting is not accurate. for
Okay.
many reasons, because of a lack of racial diversity, because of a lack of Black voices and control and ownership, because of the commercial interests and capitalism run amok in the ways that corporate entities control so much of the messaging and editorializing of our information, and many more reasons. And so we're getting noise, we're getting information, so to speak, but so much of it is disinformation.
You know, that's true. I can attest to that at least because I became a candidate for an office in the year 2016. I ran for judge on the circuit court
Mm,
for Anne Arundel County in a
mhm.
contested judicial election. And I'm here to tell you that half the news stories that were printed about various things that happened during the campaign were half truths. They were a lot of disinformation, and it just snowballed. It just became worse. So, and some of the stories were skewed. But the bad part about it is that the media can be powerful and spread poison to voters. And not only can they spread misinformation, disinformation, and poison to voters, it can change the trajectory of the election. And, that just happens. But there's a lot of unpacking to do in that video clip and in what Elizabeth experienced, because we have the 14th Amendment here. The 14th Amendment has been passed and has been a part of history for so long that guarantees equal justice under the law. So how is it? And we have the Equal Pay Act. So how is it that quoting a statement from Elizabeth, a reporter can earn $25,000 less than she's making, and that's another reporter, and they're not as experienced as she is? How can that happen?
Mhm.
Go ahead, Collette.
Well, I mean, so the paper that she was working at is a good example of one thing that happens a lot, which is, this paper is owned by a corporation called Gannett. And Gannett is kind of notorious for buying up local newspapers and, so to speak, bleeding them dry, whittling them down to the least amount of reporters, disappearing people who have a lot of experience. And they're very notorious right now for underpaying women and people of color. The News Guild, which is the labor union for newsroom workers, did a report here in Arizona and found, not here in Arizona, the News Guild nationally did a report and found that Gannett was paying white men on average 16,000 more than folks of color and women in that organization. And that's just Gannett. When you talk, that's newspapers, but when you talk about television, entertainment, across sectors, our media system is very, very consolidated and centralized into the hands of just a few companies. But Joe, I don't want to take up all the space. I'm sure you have thoughts on how.
No, it's what you just said. These publicly traded companies, trying to maximize profit, and then you have power dynamics that exist forever, right? And who gets paid more, who gets the better jobs, who gets job promotions, in these newsrooms, right? And so when you have publicly traded companies, they're there to serve the shareholder, right? And so it's like, this is what happened. You have so many newspapers today, even owned by hedge funds, and so it's antithetical, or it's like, how can we have a just media system when we have these giant corporations controlling, who they're in the business to make money. News is the product in which you're trying to maximize profit, but that's why we're like not informed as the way as we should be, and this plays out in newsrooms, obviously, like who gets hired, who gets paid, how they get paid. I want to say that while we're very critical of journalism, in this, I mean, all you have to do is look at the history of journalism and how it's covered Black folks in the Black community. It's like as we've been mentioning, there's a historical narrative that Black folks were a threat to society. In the first very printed newspaper, continuous newspaper in the United States, the Boston Newsletter, early 1700s, and that theme still carries today because it's serving a political purpose. But with that said, there's also we also respect and admire so many journalists who who decide to get into newsrooms despite these conditions, who work for these papers because they believe in journalism, but they have employers and a system, as Collette said before, that really is not there to support support journalism, the craft of journalism, and the public service of journalism. So that's the struggle, right? We have a lot of great journalists in there. We have also journalists who are not that great either, right? But we have a lot of folks from our own communities who are in there trying to do the right thing, but they work for these institutions that again, the publicly traded companies in which journalism is not seen as a public service. It's seen as a way to maximize profit,
Well, even how the Black Panther, for example, movement was portrayed in the media. I think that that's a stark example of sometimes disinformation and misinformation. And it was designed to really paint a negative picture of the organization that did some very good things.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Color of Change did a study that we often cite. I believe it was around 2017, where they found that in the New York City area, local news outlets, particularly the ABC affiliate there, was portraying Black folks as involved in crime in about 80% of their crime stories, when in actuality, Black folks actually represented only about 40% of people being arrested for crimes in that city. And when you factor in stop and frisk and targeting, that number would be even lower without that. And it just goes to show, and there have been many studies of this dynamic in communities across the country, and going back to what you're talking about with the Black Panther Party, that so much news, so much of what we get fed that is called news is really geared towards that profiteering that Joe was just mentioning, and people thinking that having, salacious stories or stories that feed stereotypes, like stereotypes of Black people being inherently dangerous or other types of stereotypes, that type of those types of stories are the ones that are going to get the most views, or now in the digital age, the most clicks, the most ratings, and that they will actually even over-index their reporting to make it seem as though Black people are committing more crimes, or Black Panthers in that case are more dangerous, even when that is actually in direct opposition to reality, just so that they can keep a certain narrative going, one that they think will pad profits. And then sometimes it's not even just about the money, it's also white supremacy, people who understand that media power and narrative power can be used to shape society, and want to have a society that is still built on a racial caste system, as Joe said.
So what is the Media 2070 project? Where is it going? And let's bring that word up, media reparations, again.
Yeah, I'll just say that a little bit on the last question too. The idea of these media companies, as Collette said, like as we say in the Media 2070 essay, and we talk about like the media system is no different than any other system, right? It was created to uphold racial hierarchy, and so the media system, and to this day, that's amongst its primary goal. And there's a long history of, we talk about the Black Panther paper, but the long history of Black newspapers being destroyed, and Black publishers and editors being arrested, like during World War I, or like Ida B. Wells's paper was destroyed, right? In Wilmington, North Carolina, the paper there was destroyed, and the coup happened in 1898, right? Overthrowing a multiracial government. So and when it comes to Black folks fighting for themselves and having a narrative that's challenging a racial caste system, that is a threat, And so as we see today in schools with critical race theory, and this as using critical race theories as a way to undo people learning about actual, like, what, learning history about what true origins of our country and the foundation in which it was built on. That's why they're going after it. As far as I'll just wrap it up real quick. It's Media 2070, and I'll pass it to Collette. We're trying to reconcile and repair the history of harm, right? And we say 2070 because we know this is going to take time. I can it's a little more of a story than that, but but for the sake of time, I'm just going to why we say 2070, but the goal is to redress what happened, right? To reckon with the history of anti-Black racism perpetuated by a media system. That's getting like government. That's challenging government institutions like the FCC to reckon with his own history of racism. There's newspapers that have been apologizing, including the Baltimore Sun and others, trying to reckon with those papers to see like how do you repair the harm that has happened and how we through policy. But there's also a critical cultural component as that Collette in this film that we have to help people to understand, like, because when we think about media, folks continue to think about how we get more of us in these institutions so we can represent our stories and tell our stories. And should we be sending folks into institutions that are causing us harm, or can we create a new media system where there's an abundance of Black-owned media properties and that as a result of media reparations and a fund created to order to fund Black media?
You brought up the Baltimore Sun apology, and I have to acknowledge that I have been a part of that process. I am part of a Maryland statewide equity in media committee that was formed for the purpose of bringing the media to to their attention. Hey, we don't like the way you are reporting stories. Everything is mugshot above the fold, front page, and you don't do that consistently for all crimes. And for the most part, you do it in a slanderous way, because some people haven't even been convicted of anything, and after they are acquitted of the crime, where do they go back and get their reputation after they've been slandered to smithereens? And not only that, the media committee was very helpful in advancing these apologies, not just by the Baltimore Sun. The Capital Gazette also, prior to that, made an apology, and they acknowledged the fact that during the history of those newspapers, they did not always portray minorities in the most favorable light. And it's done in a biased way. And we can go through history. You can start with Baltimore's mayors, from the way Sheila Dixon was portrayed in the press, to the way Kathy Pugh was portrayed in the press, and how there were other people that were part of the same board system, self-dealing, and it's like silence. There was a little bit of press about the fact that there was more than one person self-dealing. But hey, Kathy Pugh got the brunt of that. And she was the one that was targeted, indicted, plea bargain, went and so on. And the same thing with Marilyn Mosby, the whole country. Every time she makes a move, the press is on it. She has a day in court. They're deciding on motions. Courts decide on motions all over the country. But no, we have to hear about Marilyn Mosby's motion, bit by bit, piece by piece, letter by letter, dot by dot, cross the T by cross the T. We have to hear about it. So there is a very unevenness, if you will. But this crosses over into how people are elected, who stays in office. And so people have to understand some of this is malicious. A lot of this is not only just malicious, it's designed to financially destroy people too. So, they have to defend themselves. Same thing going on with in the state of Florida, campaign finance violations against the last contender who went up against Ron DeSantis in Florida. So Andrew Gilliam. So I don't see that this is unintentional at all. It's very targeted and it's very intentional. So there's a lot to be done and a lot that we need, I think, to correct. when it comes to unfairness in the media. You're where do we go from here? I mean, what are your
Well, when the situations that you just described, which, are such egregious examples of unfairness, and there are so many others across sectors, whether it be politics, federally, locally, what have you. But what those are a big symptom of the deep partnership that we see between media and policing. And oftentimes what happens is that it's not just a media story, right, that tarnishes someone's reputation, but it's coverage that can lead to prosecution. It's coverage that leads to, as you mentioned, people being financially destroyed, families and lives being destroyed. And so the Media Reparations Project, we understand reparations as a process, not just a destination. And along the way, we understand that there's a lot of reckoning that has to take place. We have to understand what is the harm that has happened, whether it be to Black folks within dominant media companies or in Black-owned media companies and people attempting to own media. We have to understand how people have been shut out of owning and controlling media because of federal policies coming from the FCC. And we have to understand how local communities have been harmed when certain stories have been buried, like the story of the Tulsa massacre, or when people have been unfairly accused and when false stories have been run, maybe leading to racial violence or leading to people losing their livelihoods or even losing their lives. And we have to understand that journalism requires multiple sources, and that when a police press release is issued, that can't be the only source on stories of shootings involving law enforcement or stories just involving criminal justice reporting, that we have to listen to community members and people who have witnessed what has taken place. And we can't just rely on one narrative. We understand that.
You said not relying on one narrative. But we as the community, we have limited choices because there's not a Black newspaper on every corner. And how do we get the right story out there, or to change the disinformation to correct information? I mean, how do we as a people do that?
I think there's a lot of ways we do it. I'll be brief, but I think that one of the things we have available to us is the power of solidarity, and that when we do have Black journalists and other journalists of color who are telling our stories truthfully, who are connected and grounded to the community, we have to know that we have the power to support them. And that when they are facing difficulty in their newsroom, or when they are moved from a certain beat where they were making a difference, that we can show up and show out. We can picket. We can let these news organizations and media organizations know that we support our community connected journalists and that we want to hear from them. And then the other thing that we can do is make sure that, of course, we're supporting those outlets that are local and even nonprofit, like City Bureau in Chicago. I believe Baltimore Beat in Baltimore is one that we have partnered with, and many others who are doing the hard work of telling local stories and doing that investigative reporting to hold the powers that be accountable and to help us have the information we need to stay safe and determine our own destinies. That we can support those outlets by reading their stories, by donating when they have donation drives, and putting, our dollar and our support where the good information is, and no longer supporting those that are exploiting us. That's just some of the solidarity that's available to us to help make sure that that we're getting that support behind those good outlets. And then you can also support Media 2070 because we're building a movement across the nation. But I want to let Joe get in here too.
Yeah. Well, before I go to Joe with closing remarks, see, now for me, I would like to see where the reparations lawsuit that evolved from the Tulsa massacre, I want to see that on the news every day. I want to see every movement of that and the rulings that are coming out. I don't see much of that in mainstream media at all.
Well, that's why we have the reparations frame, Claudia, because first of all, we had a Black news channel, for instance, a network that was covering stories like that. with Mark Lamont Hill and other folks, and then it ceased operations because funding was withdrawn. And I know that situation is still dynamic, but right now it's so expensive, it's so hard to even get a foot in the door of media ownership, and that is largely due to policies from the Federal Communications Commission. And so when I say people can support Media 2070, one of our campaigns is calling on the FCC to review its history of racism and policymaking. Joe mentioned it earlier, and to understand, why did we have the minority tax benefit go away? And Joe can talk more about this better than I can, which had increased minority ownership of media from 1% to 3%. Wasn't enough, but it had made it easier for folks, for Black folks, to be able to own media. And when we are able to own media and control media as the people making those editorial decisions, you're a lot more likely to see stories like the Tulsa Massacre Reparations lawsuit, or what's happening with the Black farmers lawsuit, and so many other situations across the country. But that takes material resources. And that's why for us, the reparations framing is so important, because we understand that there is so much money that is owed to us because of labor that has been stolen for generations. Newspapers burned down, over the years. People who have lost or been shut out from jobs in media. Just so much media wealth. Even the issuing of the very first radio and TV broadcast licenses, that was during Jim Crow. So those licenses were issued to white men only. So we were shut out from the very beginning at any opportunity to begin to amass media wealth. And so similar to the way that we are owed reparations in general for, the centuries of stolen labor from our ancestors, we're also owed for the decades and generations, rather, of media harm, as well as stolen labor and being shut out from the ability to own or control media. I could talk about this all day, Claudia, but I'll stop there. And really, Joe is the expert on matters of policy.
Well, I mean, like the idea of, look at Baltimore, right? Not only do you have the Baltimore Sun apologizing, but you also have Sinclair, right? It's based in Baltimore, right? And the idea of as Colette's saying, there needs to be wealth, like money, to be able to run news operations. So if you look at like Sinclair and you look at broadcast stations, we can point out Sinclair, but none of these broadcast stations actually do a good job of covering community, and we bleed the leads, right? And those are our communities that they're showing, right? And always frame the criminality. And so the idea, like when you hold a free broadcast license, for example, it's a license to print money, right? So what can a reparative fund, like in a city like Baltimore, that what can it do? So we're trying to get the federal policies, because they control broadcasting, to say eventually we have to get work on getting some past Congress to say should people who use the public airwaves, including cell phone companies, and pay into a reparative fund that's used to fund not just Black journalists and Black-owned media platforms, but how about Black ISPs, right? And others to serve communities. Can local communities tax tech companies, right? Because tech companies are also harming our communities with narratives as well, right? That goes into a fund in order to hire journalists, hire folks who can provide news and information for the community. And so folks are making a lot of money in this industry. It's a very lucrative industry, obviously. You just look at your monthly cable bills and cell phone bills and all that, right? And so there's money out there to these companies are making a lot of money off our suffering, and it's time for us to create a reparative fund to fund Black-owned media properties and Black ISPs and Black tech workers and Black cultural workers, and so it's a long-term vision. It's not going to be an easy fight, but the federal government has to also pay up too, right? Hopefully, part of the reparations movement, if there's ever federal legislation gets passed for reparations, that also folks in the media sector will contribute to providing financial resources to folks in the media sector. But with that, there needs to be a reparative fund within the media ecosystem in order to undo the harm, the centuries of harm that media institutions and the media system that the federal government has helped to create to redress the harm that was done.
Well, how do you handle of the response where someone says, well, wait a minute, there are other avenues. If somebody prints a negative story, somebody could go on YouTube and upload their own video to tell the truth.
I mean, that's technically true, but the megaphone is not the same megaphone. You know, if someone has a megaphone that's reaching millions, right, and it's not it's you'd be technically you could say go do that. I mean, sure. I mean, but that's not a remedy to the harm that was done. If you have powerful figures who are using the megaphones and have access to the means of communication to reach millions, and you it's a ridiculous comparison, you know. And so that's sure, YouTube is fine and everything, right? I mean, it's like we want folks to use YouTube, but that's a laughable kind of situation, you know.
So, but YouTube does reach millions. I mean, that's $1 billion industry.
Yeah, I mean,
and
but
it reaches all over the world.
This is Colette's expertise, but it's hard to have your own platform and to reach a mass audience, right? I mean, people have done it, right? Issa Rae done it and others, but they're like there's a number of people who have done it, but it's not the masses that we need, you know, the numbers that we need in order to create the kind of narrative change that we need. I'll pass it to you, Collette. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely, I agree. And I would just build on that to say also with tech companies like YouTube and Google and Facebook, you know, these companies pretty much control the entirety of what you're served when you do go search for any given topic. And so if someone does publish a falsehood, you know, about me, you know, that if that is published by certain sites that have that megaphone that Joe mentioned, the YouTube algorithm is designed to make sure that people are going to this inflammatory publisher who is often printing lies. And you can think of the different white supremacist sites or far right-wing blogs, Breitbart and others who publish content on YouTube, Facebook, and other places. Studies have shown that those types of sites over-index in terms of the level at which they are visited and at which they are served by the algorithm. And that's not by happenstance. Facebook, especially YouTube, all of these companies, they profit off of having an algorithm that is going to continually serve you the things that elicit an emotional response, more often anger. And when you're seeing these stories that, you know, that talk about a caravan is headed here from South America, they understand that for many people, due to xenophobia in this country and anti-immigrant opinions, that people will click on this and they will share it and share it and share it again, even if the story is actually completely factually inaccurate and there are no people in that group that have been convicted of any crime, and it's mostly, you know, families and babies here seeking shelter. Even if that information is not in the article and the article is patently false, the Facebook algorithm and the YouTube algorithm, if it's a video, are designed to make sure that they keep our attention, that they inflame our emotions, even if it's with lies. And that leads to profit for these media companies, which brings us back again to the need for reparations, because these are profit vehicles for people who are controlling the stories that most of us get served when we go online. So if I then, going back to my example, if I put up a video that is clearing up the falsehoods that were published about me, my little channel with 25 subscribers is not going to get served up in that algorithm. When people are watching YouTube videos and you get that recommendation at the end of the video of what you should watch next, you're not going to get served a video from me because I only have a few subscribers and my content isn't inflaming emotions. It's giving you real information. Whereas someone like the Daily Caller or, you know, the Trump campaign, their videos are going to get served and suggested to people. And this is how you see so many young people on YouTube coming over from gaming sites and other platforms, really finding themselves going down a rabbit hole of increasingly radical ideas, becoming a part of mass shootings and other types of offline violence. It's a vicious cycle that starts with tech companies that are heavily invested in disinformation as a profit vehicle via their algorithms. And we think of tech companies a lot of time as neutral and unbiased. because it's technology. It's just zeros and ones, right? But it's not. It's real people who are programming those algorithms, who are programming facial recognition technology that that has already been shown to misidentify Black people. Just a host of ways that the digital technology sector really functions to harm us for profit. And that is why reparations are necessary. And what makes it so hard to fight back with truth?
Well, then there's the question of what does reparations or media reparations in particular, what does that look like? Is that a lawsuit that's going to be in existence for 10 to 20 years? I mean, what does reparations look like?
We're in a process of coming up with a platform and developing that. We got a lot of grace. We talked to someone who's been a leader in the reparations movement for a long time, over 30 years. And she was like, hey, I just want to give you advice that we're trying to build the plane as we fly it, right? And the idea of like how to undo white racial hierarchies is really the question of our lifetime, right? It's a question we've been fighting for centuries. It's a question of whether a multiracial democracy is actually even possible when democracy has never been fully realized. We have ideas, we're building ideas, we're talking with folks, but it's going to take, it's not one, we don't see it as just one action that happens. It needs to be a series of actions that happen over time, and it's continuous action in order to repair the harm. There's not going to be like the idea of just here's $10,000 or whatever, I don't know the numerical figure, and the harm is done, that we fix the harm. There needs to be like the part of reparation. We need, like Collette said, especially in the media system, we need financial resources in order to repair the harm these narratives have caused. But at the same time, a part of reparations for us is to ensure the harm does not continue, right? How do we create a system where the harm is the myth of Black inferiority, the narrative of Black inferiority is dismantled, right? And so it's a series of actions over a long period of time, and not just one action. And that's in the process we're trying to figure out what is the first actions within this project that we are process of taking, and hopefully more folks will come into the struggle, and there'll be more ideas and more ideation happening on like all the different ways that we can implement this, from tech companies to cultural workers, Hollywood, the music industry, like this, anywhere where narrative is created and harming folks. How can we potentially build this out? Right now, we're focused on the news media, right? But this is about narrative shift, right?
But when you say news media, you're talking about television too. And if depending upon which jurisdiction you're in, for example, if you're in the District of Columbia area and in other jurisdictions, you see a lot of Black male reporters, Black female reporters, Black anchors that are there earning big bucks. Then you switch nationally. You see on Good Morning America, Robert Roberts. You see Michael Strahan, and then you see Gayle King on CBS, and many others. So I mean, I just touched the tip of the iceberg here. And if you look at their careers, and if their salary is disclosed, you say, well, where's the injustice?
But no, but not. I mean, sure, there's a lot of folks of color on television, not because of long struggles of folks to integrate television, but doesn't mean what is actually reported is different. I mean, television news, it's like you only have 23 minutes or whatever it is per half hour, and the format that was created is a great article in the Philadelphia Inquirer. It came out, I think, earlier this year, last year, that talked about the history of the action news format. And they knew it was a racist format, this format of that we have where it's like access to poor folks, access to people of color, access to Black folks by the news media. They have access to them, working with, as Collette was saying, working with the police and understanding, listening to the police scanners in the newsroom and know like what stories are easy to produce to get on the air that's going to incite people to increase ratings. So, sure, there's more people of color on television, but doesn't mean the actual information we're getting is actually helping us. And I'm sure a lot of of folks who are on television are doing their best to ensure the story is told in a way that doesn't harm the community. But look, you look at if you go to a Journalists of Color conference, Black Journalists Convention, NHJ convention, but go to these conventions, what we're saying now, what we're talking about, like the satisfaction with the own industry and how our communities are covered, you're going to hear it there too. So, as we said, presence, as Rashad Robinson, Color Change, we quote him in an essay, says presence doesn't mean power, and doesn't mean the power to change the actual narrative, especially when you have the Sinclairs of the world and broadcast publicly traded companies that are making a lot of money on broadcast. Broadcasting is like a license to print money, and so they have a formula. They have a formula for news, and studies have shown, as Collette mentioned about the New York City, the color change study, where Black community, other communities are over index on stories about crime. You're going to get very little news that really informs you about what's happening in your communities and your cities. So
and that's narrative control, Joe. There was another study we cite in our essay that found in 2017 that networks like Fox News, which is the most watched, the highest rated cable network, and CNN, those types of networks had white families representing just 17% of the folks in their coverage of poverty, even though white folks make up 60% of all poor families in this country. But this is weaponized, this dynamic is weaponized to make it seem as though Black folks are somehow more dependent on social services. And then that gives politicians license to advocate for policies that erode services like, food benefits, Social Security even, and other, things that are a part of our government's responsibility to us. So, when you're talking about narrative control, representation is a whole other separate issue from that. We may have a few wonderful Black faces on our television screens, but unfortunately, those people by and large are not making the decisions of what's covered. And even in some of our network media, there are Black people in positions of power. But again, when it comes down to it, these are corporations that are making decisions based on their shareholders and based on profit motives. And so we understand that representation, though we have fought for it and we have made great gains and it is necessary, is only one part of a much more comprehensive picture, a much larger picture. And that's why we talk about things in terms of reparations, which could really bring about the types of narrative control, transfers of power that are needed in order to make sure that we have the real stories of our communities being told. When you have a natural disaster and people are being portrayed as looters, why is it that Wilmington, North Carolina, a certain area of it floods every hurricane season? Well, that's a predominantly Black area that was built in a floodplain, against the advice of engineers. But that often is not included in these stories about why folks from this particular housing project are then going into the Family Dollar there on the corner in the wake of a devastating flood to try to get, some paper towels or some formula. Not to say that there, aren't other issues at play there, but the ways that stories like that and stories after Hurricane Katrina and other stories related to climate change are reported are very much in ways that portray us as criminal or just somehow inherently inferior. And all really what's needed is history, context, empathy, and a sense of Black humanity that's really missing. And representation alone is not going to enable that. I probably need to hurry up and finish this statement here. So I'll just close and say, last year and in 2020, even we saw a lot of reporters rising up within their newsrooms, like Alexis Johnson out in Pittsburgh, and who were taken off of the coverage that they had been doing, covering Black Lives Matter protests and other types of retaliation. And so what it brings us to realize is that even though they're present, maybe on your screen or in your newsroom, if folks aren't supported by leadership, and if a news organization isn't committed to caring for Black communities, then we're not going to see the change. And that begins with reparations and repairing direct harms.
Thank you so much, both of you. You've enlightened us greatly, and we appreciate you very much for sharing with us about Media 27 Project. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Welcome, Terry Gibson, Senior Director of Legal Shield. Why should we join Legal Shield?
Because it makes perfect sense. You know, when I was introduced to this many years ago, I thought about the fact that you could have unlimited legal counsel. You can have 24/7 emergency access to an attorney. You can have your will done for a fraction of what it will cost you to go through a traditional attorney. That's why you should join Legal Shield.
Well, it says that, according to Investopedia, it is the best online legal services for 2022. Why do you suppose it received that rating?
Well, because it is, because Legal Shield has top-rated attorneys. Legal Shield handles many different areas of law. The company has been around for 50 years, so that's a lot of stability, and they have many success stories.
Well, I understand also that if I wanted to sign up, and I already have Legal Shield, and I can really attest to the fact that it is a great product, especially if you want quick answers to legal questions like, should I use my sick leave for COVID-19 isolation? And preparing a last will and testament. And we're talking about for the low cost of $29.95 per month. So let me repeat that, $29.95 per month. I mean, I don't know of any law firm that could match that.
There is none.
So the 5 Ps, and when we have a checklist for estate planning, all of this is covered for your $29.95 a month.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Legal Shield for that $29.95 will prepare for you a standard will, which is your last will and testament, a living will, a healthcare power of attorney, and a durable power of attorney. Those documents alone, normally, as I understand it, comes to around $2,000 a month, but here it's included along with the other service for the $29.95 per month.
Well, what about your spouse?
The plan covers your spouse and your children under the age of 26, living in the same household, and all the members of the family are entitled to the same benefits.
That's marvelous. That's
Yes.
absolutely marvelous.
It
So
is.
if we click this link that is currently on our screen, we would immediately go to this page here, and it says protection for your family, your business, and your personal identity. Those are many options there.
Right. Because Legal Shield has coverage for your family. Legal Shield also has coverage for your business. We have identity theft plans, CDLP plans. I mean, many different plans to cover whatever your needs are in life. So that's why you have here choices.
That's wonderful, because you still can choose a traditional law firm, but for the quick answers to questions, and what about contract review? I find it extremely useful, and I've been practicing for 34 years. It's good to have some access to contracts, which you do get under this plan.
Exactly, absolutely, because all of us probably know of a horror story of someone who signed a contract and had some negative consequences because they signed something they didn't understand. Option to pay an attorney somewhere between $300 and $500 an hour. The average person would probably just sign it as is.
And say, no, I can't afford that.
Exactly.
So when they say that they are leveling the playing field here, they really do mean it, because you are really getting a bargain rate for access to consultations.
Exactly, because prior to Legal Shield, legal access was available to the rich and famous, or the people who could afford it. So now at $29.95 per month for a family, the level field is definitely the playing field is definitely level, because everyone now has equal access under law.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So thank you so much, Terry, for this opportunity to share Legal Shield with our audience.
Thank you for having me.